We are rapidly approaching the best time of the year to buy a C5 Corvette. Why? Because we're heading into fall, and that means downward pressure on prices, especially here in the Midwest, and generally in the entire northern half of the United States as well. And since the search radius that many people use for their Corvette is quite large versus something ubiquitous like a Toyota Camry, that means the downward pressure is going to kind of bleed into all of the neighboring states as well. So if you've been thinking about purchasing a C5 Corvette, now is the time to get serious, and here are 10 things to take into consideration.
Toys for life.
Consideration number one is how many miles are on the C5 you're looking at. Cars that have less than 40,000 miles are going to command a major premium over all other mileage groups. My biggest concern for this group is that at only 40,000 miles or less, that means somewhere around 1,800 miles were driven a year, and perhaps some years it didn't get driven at all. That has me concerned about fluids. Did it get driven enough to warrant a regular oil change? Did it get driven enough to get that oil up to 200 degrees or warmer to boil off any moisture that's in the oil? Did it get driven enough to make sure the gas didn't get stale? Stale gas is very hard on fuel injectors and the entire fuel system. My second biggest concern about cars with less than 40,000 miles is, did it get driven enough to keep the rodents away? If you've ever had a car that's had a family of mice live in it, you know that it's nasty, it's smelly, and mice like to chew, especially on things like wiring, which is not good. And lastly, like I mentioned, owners of specimens with less than 40,000 miles are going to demand a significant premium. And so for the average C5 buyer out there, I just recommend staying away from these ultra low mile cars for the reasons mentioned, unless you absolutely need a low mile car and you know that the previous owner has properly cared for it, maintained for it, and taken the necessary precautions while storing it. In my humble opinion, the sweet spot for miles on a used C5 Corvette is between 40 and 80,000 miles. This means that on average it was driven somewhere around 3,000 miles per year, which hopefully means frequent oil changes, long enough trips to make sure that the moisture that kind of gathers in the oil is boiled off, and enough trips to the gas station to hopefully ensure that the C5 has not had to endure the negative effects of running on stale gasoline. Additionally, cars with between 40 and 80,000 miles are much more likely to be had for a very reasonable price compared to that 40,000 and under mile group. When looking at specimens of the C5 that have more than that magic 100,000 miles on the clock or above, that obviously means the prices are going to be lower and lower as the miles go higher and higher above 100,000. So if you're looking for a really good deal, there's definitely some bargains to be had in C5s with 100,000 miles and above, because some of these cars were extremely well cared for, extremely well maintained, driven mainly on the freeway, which is a lot easier than stop and go driving, and stored inside. So if you're going to search in this 100,000 mile and above category, make sure that either you are mechanically inclined or you have a good trusted friend that is, so you can sift through the specimens that are on the market and separate the gems from the junk. Moving on to a mechanical consideration when looking for a C5 Corvette. These cars came with two different brake control modules. The first design is from 1997 to 2000. The second design is from 2001 to 2004. I don't know which model is more reliable, but I do know that if there are problems, the 97 to 2000 brake control module is not typically repairable, and they're not available new, while the 2001 through 2004 brake control module can typically be repaired. What this means is if you buy a 97 through 2000 C5 Corvette, you are more likely to encounter a brake module problem that will render your anti-lock brakes, your active handling, and your traction control inoperable. The brakes will still work, so the car will have brakes that are as good or better than most passenger cars produced all the way up to 1980, but you will have a light on in the dash. And another thing to consider is that probably the majority of C5 owners never actually trigger anti-lock brakes, active handling, and traction control anyway. So at the end of the day, exactly how big of a deal is this potential problem with 97 to 2000 C5 Corvettes? That's up to you to decide. I wish this wasn't the situation, but it is the reality, and I would be negligent if I did not bring this issue up. Item number 3, once you find a C5 you're interested in, Find a way to have a conversation with the owner. How long did they own the car? Why are they selling the car? Ask them questions about it so you can tell if it comes out in the conversation that they were passionate about the car, they loved it, and they took good care of it, or perhaps to them it was just kind of a car. All things being equal, I am much more interested in working with a seller who is passionate about their C5. It probably means they took better care of the exterior, the interior, maintenance, how they stored the car, and most importantly, that they never abused the car. Item number 4, the C5 you're looking at is likely going to cost more than $10,000, so we're not buying a $500 winter beater here, so spend a few bucks and get an auto check or a Carfax. These reports will show valuable information like, God forbid, it's got a salvage title, or how many accidents it's been in, how many owners it's had, and how many miles each owner owned that C5 for. Sometimes it shows the different maintenance activity of the car, what part of the country the car has lived its life in, and many more important factors. Sometimes you can get a deal if you buy 3 or 4 of these reports up front, and always be sure to ask the seller if they have a copy they can share. When you set up a time with a seller to inspect and test drive a C5, be sure that they know that you want to start with a cold engine, preferably one that has sat overnight. And then when you get there, carefully touch the engine block with the engine not running to make sure that it's cold, check the oil to make sure it's at the proper level, and then go ahead and start the engine and carefully listen for noises. C5 LS engines are known for some piston slap, especially the earlier years. So if there's a slight noise that goes away quickly as the engine warms up and the piston expands, that's not a big deal. If the noise is really loud and or it doesn't go away, this could be a sign of more serious internal damage. So be prepared to walk if this happens unless you're up for some serious mechanical repairs, and the price reflects the same. So you've been warned, do not skip this simple step of experiencing the cold engine startup. Otherwise, you could be in for buyer's remorse after you buy the car, and then the next day you get to experience your first cold startup. Also, since the engine is already running, just let it run as you do your full comprehensive exterior and interior inspection. You want to get it up to full operating temperature, and you want that oil to get up to 200 degrees or above. Then you can be checking for leaks while you're standing there as well, and you can observe the oil pressure at idle with the oil at or above 200 degrees, and I'd be looking for at least 20 pounds per square inch. And then when you finally go for your test drive, again with the oil at or above 200 degrees Fahrenheit, I'd be looking for at least 30 pounds per square inch at cruising speeds, and in the upper RPM areas, I'd be looking for at least 40 pounds per square inch. Consideration number 6, again with that engine running, take the time to go through every single exterior body panel and every interior surface, especially the driver's seat. These cars are 20 years old, so they're not going to be perfect, but if they have more than just a few minor blemishes, you may want to walk, because these cars, even though they're 20 years old, they're babied as second cars by most. And I assure you there's going to be another C5 out there with a similar mileage that has very few imperfections. Also, if you happen to show up for an inspection and test drive of a C5 and you find that the exterior needs a wash, the interior needs a vacuuming, to me that's a huge red flag that this is probably an owner that wasn't passionate about this car. And based on this alone, I would seriously consider walking. Consideration number 7, bring a flashlight and inspect the battery and the area around the battery very carefully. Even though they're sealed lead acid batteries, typically when they're exposed to the relatively high underhood temperatures of a C5, which easily get to 140, 160 degrees, even more, it's not uncommon for acid to seep up through the post area, run down the side of the battery, where it drips down onto the computer and the main wiring harness. So if you see any signs that show that acid may have been dripping down that battery, I would either walk or have further inspections done where you can get a good look at the computer and the wiring harness to make sure they haven't been compromised by leaking battery acid. Consideration number 8, this is everything electrical. Make yourself a long checklist and check everything out. The headlights, the taillights, the blinkers, the turn signals, the gauges, the heads-up display, the power windows, mirrors, door locks, everything. Take the time to buzz through your checklist and check everything out so you can avoid any unpleasant surprises after you've already bought the car. Consideration number 9, take a look at your tires, all 4 of them. They do tell a story. You want to look and see if they look like they're almost new, if they're in the middle or almost bald, and you want to see if the wear pattern on each tire is relatively even across. If there's uneven wear, it could be signs that it needs an alignment. It could also be signs that you've got bad ball joints and things of that nature, which need attention and cost additional money. And also, if they're bald, a set of tires for this car is going to cost somewhere near about $1,000. Consideration number 10, you're finally on your test drive. The engine's already fully warmed up. Be sure to check and make sure the air conditioning works because AC repairs are very expensive. And then make sure the engine has good sounds, it has good power. At some point, make sure you get on it pretty hard, even if you have to ask for forgiveness, to make sure that the engine pulls really well and doesn't make any weird noises. Make sure that the transmission goes through all of the gears as it should, or if it's a clutch, make sure that the clutch operates properly, and with either transmission, you don't want any signs of any slippage. You're also going to want to hit the brakes fairly hard a few times. Make sure you don't have that dreaded pulsating pedal or any noise that are indicative of brake pads that are at the end of their service life. When you get back from your test drive, and that test drive should have taken you 20 minutes, preferably a lot more, or it wasn't comprehensive enough. Be sure when you park the car, you scout out a place where there's no fluids on the ground. That way when you park the car and shut it off, you'll be able to look underneath and see if anything is leaking. Now that you've shut the engine off, turn the ignition key back on, and using the built-in C5 diagnostics, go through and see if there's any trouble codes for the engine, the transmission, and all of the different modules. If there's anything that stands out that's indicative of a problem. And if you're not sure how to use the C5's built-in diagnostics, take a look at this video right up here and it'll show you exactly what to do. That's going to do it for this one, guys. Good luck in your C5 hunting. If you want more information about what I believe is the best year C5 Corvette to buy, take a look at this video. It's somewhere over here. If you found value in this video, click that thumbs up, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and most of all, thanks for watching.